The calm echo of Jasmine Crockett's voice resonated through the congressional chamber, while, 16 blocks away at the White House, Trump's hands were trembling. Because the biggest secret he had hidden for 20 years was finally about to see the light of day. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat at the witness table in Committee Room 2154 of the Rayburn House Office Building, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. The navy blue blazer she wore was pressed to perfection, her hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail that framed her face with professional precision. But it was what lay beneath her calm exterior that would soon shake the very foundations of American politics. The manila folder resting under her palm contained documents that had taken 3 months to verify, cross-reference, and legally clear for public disclosure. Documents that would prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the most powerful man in America had built his entire political legacy on a foundation of lies. "The hearing will come to order," announced Chairman Bradley Morrison, his voice carrying the tired authority of someone who had presided over countless committee meetings. The room settled into its familiar rhythm. Aides shuffling papers, journalists checking their phones, and the usual suspects preparing to deliver the usual talking points about government accountability and transparency. But Jasmine had no intention of delivering usual talking points. "Congresswoman Crockett," Morrison continued, adjusting his reading glasses with practiced efficiency. "You have 5 minutes for your opening statement regarding federal transparency measures and the accountability protocols for executive branch communications." Jasmine looked up from her folder, her eyes scanning the room with the measured calm of a trial attorney who had already won the case before the jury had even been seated. The C-SPAN cameras captured every angle of her composed demeanor, broadcasting her image to viewers across the nation who had tuned in expecting another routine congressional hearing. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice carrying that distinctive clarity that made people stop their conversations and pay attention. "But before we discuss transparency measures in the abstract, I believe this committee needs to address what happens when the highest office in the land operates with a complete and deliberate absence of transparency." Morrison's eyebrows lifted slightly. This deviation from the prepared agenda was already more interesting than he had anticipated for a Tuesday morning hearing. "Congresswoman, if you could please stick to the agreed-upon topics outlined in your submitted materials." "With all due respect, Mr. Chairman," Jasmine interrupted, her tone remaining perfectly even, never rising above conversational level. "Transparency isn't a topic you can schedule around or confine to predetermined talking points. It's either a principle you uphold consistently, or it's not a principle at all." She opened the manila folder with deliberate precision. 16 blocks away, in the Roosevelt Room of the White House, President Trump was pacing back and forth across the presidential seal woven into the carpet. His red tie hung slightly askew, his hair showing signs of the nervous running of hands through it that had become his unconscious habit during moments of stress. "Find out who that woman is," he barked into the speakerphone that connected him to his communications team. "The one Crockett's talking about. I want her full record, school, work, family, everything, and I want it now." Hope Sinclair, his personal legal counsel, sat at the mahogany conference table with a stack of legal briefs spread before her. Her usual composure was beginning to show cracks as she watched the live feed of the congressional hearing on the wall-mounted television. "Sir," came the voice through the speakerphone, belonging to junior aide Marcus Webb, "we believe the individual being referenced is Genevieve Larkinson. She legally changed her name in 2010. There's a sealed court filing, but—" "I don't care about court filings," Trump snapped, his voice rising to a level that made the Secret Service agents outside the door exchange glances. "I care about stopping this story before it destroys everything we've built. Find her, discredit her, do whatever it takes." Brian Halford, his chief of staff, cleared his throat carefully. "Sir, with respect, perhaps we should focus on damage control rather than—" "Damage control?" Trump wheeled around to face him, his face flushed with a combination of anger and panic. "Brian, that woman is about to destroy my presidency, my family, and everything I've worked for. This isn't about damage control. This is about survival." Back in the hearing room, Jasmine had removed a single sheet of paper from her folder. The document bore the official letterhead of the Superior Court of the District of Columbia, along with multiple security stamps and verification codes that marked it as authentic legal documentation. "What I have here," she said, holding the document up so that the cameras could capture its official nature, is a sealed affidavit that was filed in D.C. Superior Court on March 15, 2005. This affidavit contains sworn testimony regarding a paternity claim that directly involves a sitting president and members of his family. The room had grown quiet in the way that only happens when people sense they are witnessing something historically significant. Reporters stopped typing on their laptops, aides put down their phones, even the usually impatient committee members leaned forward in their chairs. "Congresswoman," interjected Representative Patricia Valdez, a Republican member of the committee, "are you suggesting that this committee should be discussing sealed court documents? Because if so, I would question both the legality and the appropriateness of—" "I'm suggesting," Jasmine replied, her voice remaining calm but gaining a subtle edge of steel, "that when a sitting president uses the power of his office to suppress evidence that would fundamentally alter the public's understanding of his character and integrity, that becomes a matter of national interest that transcends normal protocols." She held up a second document. "This is a copy of a non-disclosure agreement signed on March 18, 2005, 3 days after the affidavit was filed. The NDA was funded through a shell company that has since been traced back to entities controlled by then-private citizen Donald Trump. The payment amount was $2.3 million, paid in installments over 6 months, to ensure the silence of the individual who filed the original paternity claim." In the White House Communications Office, phones were ringing with the relentless urgency of a newsroom during a breaking story. Sarah Chen, the deputy press secretary, was fielding calls from every major news outlet in the country, all asking the same question. "Can you confirm or deny the allegations being made by Representative Crockett?" "No comment at this time," she repeated for the 15th time in 10 minutes. "The White House does not respond to unsubstantiated claims made during congressional hearings." But privately, the administration was in full crisis mode. In the Oval Office, Trump had called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors. Melania Trump was participating via secure video link from Geneva, where she was attending a youth wellness summit. Her expression on the screen was composed but distant, her eyes carrying the weight of someone who had lived with uncomfortable truths for far too long. "You told me this was handled," she said softly, her accent slightly more pronounced when she was under stress. "You told me the documents were sealed permanently." "They were sealed," Trump replied, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "This woman, Crockett, she shouldn't have access to any of this. Someone leaked it to her." "Or," Hope Sinclair interjected carefully, "someone with legitimate legal authority provided her with information that serves the public interest." Trump's eyes flashed with anger. "Don't lecture me about public interest, Hope. This is about destroying me, pure and simple." Melania's image on the screen remained perfectly still for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more weight than any of Trump's shouting. "Donald, you promised me that Barron would never have to know the truth this way. You promised me we could protect him from this." The room fell silent. For the first time since the hearing had begun, Trump had no immediate response. Representative Crockett was now holding up a third document, this one bearing the seal of a private DNA testing laboratory in Maryland. "This is a paternity test conducted on May 7, 2005, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "The test was ordered by court mandate following the filing of the paternity claim I referenced earlier. The results of this test were unambiguous." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the room like a heavy blanket. "The test conclusively proved that Donald Trump is not the biological father of Barron Trump." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the kind of silence that occurs in the moment before an avalanche, when even the mountain itself seems to hold its breath. Representative Morrison looked as though he had been physically struck. "Congresswoman, are you stating on the record under oath that you have documented evidence that—" "I am stating under oath and on the record, that I have reviewed court-sealed documents, verified financial records, and laboratory test results that prove beyond any reasonable doubt that President Trump has knowingly presented false information about his family structure to the American people for nearly 2 decades. She placed the DNA test results on the table in front of her with the gentle precision of someone laying down a royal flush. Furthermore, I have evidence that President Trump used his influence, his financial resources, and ultimately the power of the federal government to suppress this information, to silence the individuals involved, and to maintain a public fiction that has fundamentally influenced his political career and his presidency. Back in the White House, Trump was staring at the television screen with the hollow expression of a man watching his entire world crumble in real time. The remote control lay in pieces on the floor where he had hurled it against the wall moments earlier. "Sir," Brian Halford ventured cautiously, "we need to prepare a response. The press pool is going to want a statement within the hour." "A statement?" Trump's voice was barely recognizable. Hoarse, broken, all the bluster drained out of it. "What statement, Brian?" "Sorry, America, I've been lying to you for 20 years about my own family." Hope Sinclair was frantically typing on her laptop, trying to draft legal responses to what was clearly going to be a tsunami of lawsuits, investigations, and political fallout. "Sir, we need to focus on limiting our legal exposure. If we can challenge the authenticity of these documents—" "They're authentic," Trump said quietly, sinking into his chair behind the resolute desk. "Every single one of them. I know because I signed half of them myself." The admission hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Melania's voice came through the video link, steady but sad. "I'm cutting my trip short. I'll be back tonight." "Melania, wait," Trump started, but she had already ended the call. What happened next was unlike anything that had ever occurred in the history of congressional hearings. Representative Crockett, having delivered her bombshell revelations with the precision of a surgeon and the authority of a judge, did something completely unexpected. She closed her folder. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her voice taking on a different quality, softer, more personal, but no less powerful. "I want to be clear about something. I didn't reveal this information to destroy a family or to score political points. I revealed it because the American people have a right to know when their leaders have built their careers on fundamental deceptions." She looked directly into the main camera, speaking not to the committee but to the millions of people watching across the country. "But I also want to acknowledge that there is an innocent young man at the center of this situation. Barron Trump did not choose to be part of this deception. He is not responsible for the choices made by the adults in his life. And whatever happens as a result of today's revelations, I hope that he will be treated with the compassion and respect that every young person deserves." The humanity of this statement, coming after the devastating precision of her evidence presentation, hit the room like a wave. Several committee members were visibly moved. One female reporter in the press gallery was quietly crying. "The truth," Jasmine continued, "is not always comfortable, it's not always convenient, and it's not always kind, but it is always necessary. Because a democracy cannot function when its leaders believe they are above the obligation to be honest with the people they serve." Within 30 minutes of Jasmine's revelations, the story had exploded across every platform, every network, and every news outlet in the world. Barron Truth was trending globally on Twitter. CNN had interrupted its regular programming for wall-to-wall coverage. Even international networks were breaking into their scheduled content to cover what was being called the most significant political revelation in modern American history. In a coffee shop in Denver, a college student named Rachel Martinez was watching the hearing on her laptop, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. "Are you seeing this?" she asked her study partner. In a barbershop in Atlanta, the entire shop had gone silent as everyone watched the small television mounted in the corner. The barber, Marcus Johnson, had stopped mid-haircut to stare at the screen. 20 years, he said to no one in particular, 20 years of lying. In a suburban home in Ohio, Sarah and Tom Peterson were sitting on their couch, their two teenagers having joined them as word of the hearing spread through their high school via social media faster than wildfire. "Mom," their 16-year-old daughter asked, "if this is true, what does it mean for Barron? I mean, he's just a kid." Sarah Peterson, who had voted for Trump twice, found herself struggling to answer that question. At 4:30 p.m., the White House press corps was assembled in the briefing room, waiting for what had been announced as an emergency press conference with President Trump. The seats were packed beyond capacity, with reporters standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallways. But as the minutes ticked by, 4:35, 4:40, 4:45, it became clear that the president was not coming. Instead, Press Secretary Jennifer Walsh approached the podium looking as though she had aged 10 years in the space of a single afternoon. "The president will not be taking questions at this time," she announced, her voice barely steady. "The White House is reviewing the allegations made during today's congressional hearing and will respond through appropriate legal channels." "Jennifer!" shouted Jim Acosta from CNN. "Can you confirm or deny that the documents referenced by Representative Crockett are authentic?" "Jennifer," called out another reporter, "has the president spoken with Barron Trump about these allegations?" "Jennifer," came a third voice, "is the president planning to resign?" But Walsh was already walking away from the podium, leaving behind a room full of unanswered questions and the growing realization that this was not a story that was going to go away. At 7:15 p.m., Jasmine Crockett was in her congressional office when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something told her to answer it. "Representative Crockett?" The voice was young, nervous, but trying to sound composed. "Yes, this is Congresswoman Crockett. This is Barron Trump." Jasmine sat down slowly in her chair. This was not a call she had expected, but somehow she was not entirely surprised by it. "Barron," she said gently, "are you okay? Are you safe?" "I'm okay," he replied, though his voice suggested otherwise. "I'm at school. I wanted to call and say thank you." "Thank you?" Jasmine was genuinely surprised. "Barron, I'm not sure I understand." "For telling the truth," he said, and she could hear him trying not to cry. "I've known for years that something wasn't right. I've heard the fights, seen the legal papers that my mom tried to hide. I've felt like I've been living in a lie my entire life, and I didn't know what to do with that feeling." Jasmine felt her heart break a little. "Barron, I want you to know that none of this is your fault. You are not responsible for the choices that adults made before you were even old enough to understand them." "I know," he said, "but I also know that secrets like this, they poison everything around them. My mom has been so sad for so long, and my dad, my father, he's been so angry all the time, and I could never understand why until now." "What are you going to do?" Jasmine asked gently. "I don't know yet," Barron admitted, "but for the first time in my life I feel like I can breathe, like I don't have to pretend anymore." The call lasted only a few more minutes, but it was perhaps the most important conversation that had taken place that day. By the end of the week, the political landscape had shifted so dramatically that it was barely recognizable. 3 major newspapers had called for President Trump's resignation. 7 Republican senators had publicly distanced themselves from the administration. The stock market had dropped 800 points in 3 days. But perhaps more significantly, a national conversation had begun about truth, accountability, and the price of political ambition. Jasmine Crockett found herself at the center of this conversation, not because she had sought the spotlight, but because she had simply done what she had always done, told the truth, backed by evidence, delivered with calm precision. In interviews that week, she was asked repeatedly whether she regretted her decision to reveal such personally devastating information. "I regret that the information existed to be revealed," she would answer. "I regret that a young man had to grow up carrying the weight of adults' deceptions. I regret that the American people were misled for so many years, but I don't regret telling the truth. Truth is not something you apologize for." Within 48 hours of Jasmine's revelation, the Department of Justice had opened a federal investigation into obstruction of justice, fraud, and abuse of power. Special Prosecutor Maria Santos was appointed to lead what would become the most comprehensive investigation of presidential misconduct in American history. The evidence presented by Representative Crockett, Santos announced at a packed press conference, raises serious questions about the use of federal resources, taxpayer money, and the machinery of government to conceal information that was materially relevant to the president's fitness for office. The investigation would eventually uncover a web of financial transactions, NDAs, and legal maneuvers that stretched back to 2005. Bank records showed that Trump had used funds from his charitable foundation, money that was supposed to help veterans and children, to pay for legal fees related to the paternity cover-up. IRS documents revealed that he had claimed tax deductions for hush money payments by categorizing them as legal consulting fees. But perhaps most damaging was the discovery of recorded conversations between Trump and his advisors, discussing ways to use federal agencies to intimidate potential witnesses and suppress evidence. In one recording, captured by the White House's own security system, Trump could be heard telling his chief of staff, "I don't care what it takes, Brian. Use the FBI, use the IRS, use whatever we have. That woman cannot be allowed to talk." When the recording was played during congressional hearings, several Republican members of Congress audibly gasped. Representative Susan Hayes from Texas, a staunch Trump supporter, was seen shaking her head in disbelief. The revelations didn't just shake American politics, they sent shockwaves around the world. Allied nations began questioning intelligence, sharing agreements with an administration that had proven itself capable of such extensive deception. NATO allies privately expressed concerns about the reliability of American leadership. Angela Merkel, in what would be one of her final statements as German chancellor, said, "When trust is broken at this fundamental level, it affects not just domestic politics, but international relationships that depend on good faith and honest communication." French President Emmanuel Macron was more direct. How can we negotiate treaties or defense agreements with a leader who has demonstrated such a willingness to deceive even about his own family? But it was the reaction from ordinary people around the world that perhaps hit hardest. In London, protesters gathered outside the American embassy with signs reading "Truth Matters" and "Accountability for All." In Canada, a poll showed that 78% of respondents had lost confidence in American democratic institutions. The damage to America's soft power was immediate and severe. Universities reported a 40% drop in international student applications. Tourism to the United States fell by 25% in the months following the revelations. Behind the scenes, the Trump family was disintegrating. Melania had returned from Geneva but was staying at the Trump Tower in New York, refusing to return to the White House. Sources close to the family reported that she was consulting with divorce attorneys and had moved significant assets into accounts under her sole control. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump found themselves caught between loyalty to their father and the undeniable evidence of his deceptions. In a private family meeting that was later leaked to the press, Don Jr. reportedly confronted his father directly. "Dad, how could you lie to us about this? How could you let us defend you when you knew the truth all along?" Trump's response, according to multiple sources in the room, was a mixture of defiance and desperation. "I did what I had to do to protect this family's reputation. Everything I did was to protect all of you." But the family was no longer buying it. Ivanka Trump, who had been one of her father's closest advisors, quietly began distancing herself from the administration. She declined to appear at public events and stopped posting supportive messages on social media. The most heartbreaking aspect of the family breakdown was Barron's situation. At just 17 years old, he found himself at the center of a media firestorm that he had never asked for. Reports surfaced that he had been pulled out of school due to harassment from other students and media attention. It was during this period that Melania made a decision that surprised everyone, including her own legal team. She reached out directly to Jasmine Crockett. The meeting took place in a secure conference room at a law firm in downtown D.C. Melania Trump arrived without her usual Secret Service detail, having specifically requested a private meeting. Jasmine came alone, having left her staff behind at Melania's request. For the first 10 minutes, neither woman spoke. They simply sat across from each other, two mothers who found themselves on opposite sides of a situation that neither had fully chosen. Finally, Melania broke the silence. "I want to thank you," she said, her voice steady but quiet. Jasmine was surprised. "Mrs. Trump, I'm not sure I understand." "For 20 years, I have been living with this secret," Melania continued. "Do you know what it's like to look at your son every day and know that his entire life is built on a lie? Do you know what it's like to watch your husband use that lie to gain power, to influence people, to shape a country?" She paused, composing herself. "I tried to tell myself that I was protecting Barron by keeping quiet, but I see now that I was only protecting the lie. And lies, Miss Crockett, lies poison everything they touch." Jasmine leaned forward slightly. "What are you asking me, Mrs. Trump?" "I'm asking you to help me tell the rest of the truth," Melania said, "because what you revealed was only the beginning. There's so much more that the American people deserve to know." What Melania revealed during that 3-hour meeting would eventually lead to additional congressional hearings, more federal investigations, and the complete dismantling of what prosecutors would later call one of the most extensive cover-ups in American political history. She provided Jasmine with documents showing that the paternity deception was just one part of a larger pattern of fraud and deception. There were falsified financial records, bogus charity donations, and evidence of tax evasion going back decades. But more importantly, she provided context that no one else could have given. "When Donald decided to run for president," she explained, "I begged him not to. I knew that this level of scrutiny would eventually expose everything, but he was convinced that his money and his influence could keep the truth buried forever." She described years of living in fear that the truth would come out, fear of what it would do to Barron, fear of what Trump might do if she ever tried to leave. "He told me once that if I ever tried to divorce him or take Barron away, he would make sure that I never saw my son again. He said he had enough lawyers and enough money to keep me tied up in court for the rest of my life." Jasmine listened with growing horror as Melania described a marriage that was less partnership than imprisonment, held together by secrets, threats, and the shared understanding that both their lives would be destroyed if the truth ever came out. "But watching you in that hearing room," Melania said, "seeing how calm you were, how prepared you were, how you weren't afraid of him or his threats, it made me realize that the truth doesn't have to be something we're afraid of. It can be something that sets us free." Armed with Melania's additional evidence, Jasmine prepared for what would become known as the second revelation. This time, she requested a joint session of Congress, something that typically only happened for State of the Union addresses or declarations of war. The request was unprecedented, but given the magnitude of the ongoing crisis, congressional leadership agreed. On a Thursday evening in November, with the entire Congress assembled and a global television audience estimated at over 500 million people, Jasmine Crockett walked to the podium in the House chamber. She carried with her a briefcase containing over 200 pages of documents, financial records, and sworn affidavits that would complete the picture of presidential corruption that she had begun to paint months earlier. "Members of Congress and people of America," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "I stand before you tonight not as a Democrat or a Republican, not as someone seeking political advantage or personal gain, but as someone who believes that our democracy cannot survive when its leaders believe they are above the law." The chamber was silent in a way that it had never been before. Every seat was filled, every eye was focused on the woman at the podium. 3 months ago, I revealed evidence that the President of the United States had engaged in a decades-long cover-up regarding his family. Tonight, I will show you that this cover-up was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of deception that touches every aspect of his business, his finances, and his presidency. She opened the briefcase. It was Barron Trump who finally forced the end. Now legally an adult and no longer under his father's legal control, He made a decision that surprised everyone, including his mother. He called a press conference and, flanked by his own attorneys, spoke publicly for the first time about his experience. "My entire life has been built on lies," he said, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "I have watched my father use those lies to gain power, to hurt people, and to damage the country that I love." He looked directly into the cameras. "I cannot stand by any longer and watch him destroy everything that America is supposed to represent. Truth, justice, accountability, these aren't just words. They're the foundation of who we are supposed to be." The young man who had been at the center of the scandal that started it all had become the moral voice that ended it. "I call on my father to resign immediately, to accept responsibility for his actions, and to allow this country to begin healing from the damage he has caused." Donald Trump resigned the presidency at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night in December, almost exactly 1 year after Jasmine Crockett had first revealed the truth about Barron's paternity. His resignation letter was brief, and even in defeat, defiant. "I have been the victim of the greatest witch hunt in American history. Despite my many accomplishments and the tremendous success of my administration, I'm being forced from office by lies, fake news, and the deep state conspiracy that has opposed me from day one. I maintain my innocence of all charges and will continue to fight these false allegations through the legal system. I resign the office of president effective immediately." He left the White House that night without ceremony, departing on Marine One for the last time as president. There were no farewell addresses, no transition meetings with his successor, no gracious transfer of power. He simply left, taking with him the shattered remains of a presidency that had been built on lies and brought down by truth. 2 years later, Jasmine Crockett stood in the same committee room where it all began. This time, she was chairing her own committee, the newly created House Committee on Government Transparency and Accountability, a direct result of the constitutional crisis her revelations had sparked. The reforms that had emerged from the Trump crisis were comprehensive and far-reaching. Presidents were now required to place all business assets in blind trusts. Financial disclosure requirements had been expanded to include family members. The use of NDAs to conceal information relevant to public office had been made illegal. But perhaps most importantly, a new culture of accountability had taken root in American politics. Elected officials knew that the American people were watching more closely than ever before, and that secrets had a way of eventually seeing the light of day. Jasmine never claimed victory in the traditional sense. She never celebrated the downfall of a presidency or the destruction of a political dynasty. Instead, she simply continued doing what she had always done: her job. But in quiet moments, when she reflected on that Tuesday morning and everything that had followed, she knew that she had accomplished something more important than political victory. She had proven that truth, backed by evidence and delivered with courage, could still triumph over lies, no matter how powerful the people telling them. In the end, that was what justice looked like. Not dramatic, not loud, not vindictive. Just calm, steady, and unshakably right. The truth, as Jasmine had always known, didn't need to be defended. It just needed to be spoken. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, speaking the truth was enough to change everything. Barron Trump, now in his second year at Georgetown Law School, had become one of the most effective advocates for government transparency in the country. He had testified before Congress on the psychological impact of political deception on families, and had helped draft legislation protecting the children of public figures from being used as political props. In his testimony, he had said something that would be quoted in textbooks for generations to come. "My father taught me that power means never having to tell the truth. Representative Crockett taught me that real power comes from having the courage to speak it, even when, especially when, it's difficult." Melania Trump had remarried, a quiet ceremony in Slovenia, attended only by family and close friends. Her book, Living in Truth, had become an international bestseller, with all proceeds going to organizations supporting victims of domestic abuse and political coercion. In the final chapter, she had written, "For 20 years, I believed that protecting a lie was the same as protecting my family. Jasmine Crockett showed me that protecting the truth was the only way to truly protect the people I loved. As for Trump himself, he was serving a 10-year federal sentence for fraud, tax evasion, and obstruction of justice. His business empire had been dismantled, his assets seized to pay back taxes and penalties. The Trump name, once synonymous with wealth and power, had become a cautionary tale about the ultimate cost of choosing lies over truth. But even in prison, according to reports from guards and fellow inmates, he maintained his innocence and claimed to be the victim of a vast conspiracy. Some people, Jasmine reflected, would never learn that the truth was not their enemy. It was their only path to redemption. On this particular Tuesday morning, exactly 2 years after her first revelation, Jasmine was reviewing testimony for a new investigation. This time, it involved a tech company that had been manipulating data to influence elections. The evidence was complex but clear. The truth, once again, was waiting to be spoken. She opened a manila folder, different from the one that had started it all, but carrying the same weight of responsibility and hope. Outside her office window, she could see groups of tourists visiting the Capitol, many of them young people who had come to see the place where, as one high school student had put it in a letter to Jasmine, someone proved that telling the truth could still matter. The letter was framed on her wall, next to her law degree and a photo of her swearing-in ceremony. It read, "Dear Representative Crockett, I am a senior in high school, and I wanted to thank you for showing my generation that politics doesn't have to be about who can lie the best or who can scream the loudest. You showed us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth and let it speak for itself. Because of what you did, I'm planning to study law. I want to be someone who brings receipts, just like you did. Thank you for proving that justice isn't just an idea. It's something real people can actually do. Sincerely, Maya Rodriguez, future truth teller." Jasmine smiled as she read the letter again, then turned her attention back to the folder in front of her. There was more work to be done, more truth to be spoken, more accountability to be demanded. But for the first time in her career, she felt like she was part of a movement that was bigger than any individual politician or political party. A movement of people who believed that democracy could only survive if it was built on truth. The hearing room began to fill up as committee members and witnesses arrived for the morning session. In a few minutes, Jasmine would again take her place at the witness table, open another folder, and speak another truth that someone powerful had tried to keep hidden. It was, she thought, exactly where she belonged. The truth, after all, was not a destination you reached once and then rested. It was a commitment you made every day, in every decision, in every moment when you had to choose between what was easy and what was right. And Jasmine Crockett had made her choice a long time ago. She was ready to speak. The truth doesn't need permission to exist. It only needs courage to be spoken. Representative Jasmine Crockett, from her memoir, Bringing Receipts, A Life in Service of Truth.